طاعتك وذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. اللهم اكتبنا في هذه الليلة من عبادك المقبولين الفائزين. اللهم اكتبنا في هذه الليلة من عتقائك من النار. اللهم اعتق رقابنا ورقاب آبائنا وأمهاتنا وإخواننا وأخواتنا وأزواجنا وذرياتنا من النار وأدخلنا الجنة مع الأبرار يا عزيز يا غفار. O Allah, we pray to you, we call upon you, we beseech you, and we ask you by your names and attributes to accept from us our prayers and our fasting. O Allah, accept from us our Ramadan. O Allah, accept from us our Ramadan. O Allah, accept from us our Ramadan. O Allah, make us of those who diligently worship you in the night and diligently fast for you in the day. O Allah, we ask you to make us of those who are emancipated from hell in the blessed month of Ramadan. O Allah, emancipate us from hell in the blessed month of Ramadan. O Allah, emancipate us and our families and our loved ones from the fire of hell in this blessed month of Ramadan. Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ameen. Ameen. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Amma ba'd. Jazakumullah khair for coming to the masjid tonight on a Saturday night after finishing the first official day of fasting. We are hoping to spend this month doing a few different types of ibadat that'll hopefully revitalize our sense of worship, strengthen our, spiritual energy, help us for the year to come, deal with the challenges, deal with the struggles, deal with the personal obstacles that may come up all throughout, with a strong sense of spirituality in everything we do. Allahumma ameen. Our hopes for these i'tikafs is to combine between worship and seeking knowledge, and also having a community component, a social component that gathers between us. These are a few different elements that we're hoping to have, and that's why in every i'tikaf we have a lecture like this. Next Friday actually, we have our meeting point. The meeting point that perhaps you might have heard is a podcast that I've been doing with Ustadh Zaied and our beloved Sheikh Yasser for the past year. And inshallah we're going to be giving a test run of it in person bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And that's going to be every Friday in Ramadan, every Friday night. It's going to be for the meeting point. And it'll be, conversation format, podcast format. And tonight I wanted to do something similar with Ustadh Zaied about a topic that actually came to mind when I was speaking with one of the brothers. He was telling me about a book he recently read about broken focus, how it's difficult for people today to focus on any one thing really because of all the distractions that are around us, between our phones, which statistics are showing that, at least for most people in our country, this phone, we end up having about 5 to 6 hours of screen time a day on this phone. And between social media and and everything else that's really inundating us with all kinds of information, some positive information and other toxic information, things that really just take up and eat away at those moments of alone time that could really help us experience things spiritually, and even actually change from who we are, change who we become as a people, and a people with oftentimes very limited attention span, very difficult for us to look at things with nuance and read something that's detail oriented. It needs to be quick and it needs to be fast, or else it will be too difficult for me to give it my time of day. That's something that I guess we all have to struggle with in some way, the reasons for that, are, I guess, multifold. That's one of the other things the brother was mentioning to me was how many times people lift up their phone. I don't know exact statistics, but I was looking into it a little bit, and some say it's about a few hundred times a day for many people that they raise their phone and just look at it like this and put it back down. And the reason why this is so important to talk about now is because one of the pillars of the Prophet ﷺ's Ramadan was al-uzla al-marhaliyya, temporary seclusion. In fact, when the Prophet ﷺ first got wahi, he was in a state of seclusion and reflection. He was in Ghar Hira doing tahannuth. The hadith mentions ثُمَّ حُبِّبَ إِلَيْهِ الْخَلَاء. He began to love those moments of seclusion, not for the sake of seclusion and isolation, but because of what it brings from the potential of reflection, sort of disconnecting from ma'lufat al-bashar, from routine, disconnecting from routine, to sort of gain perspective on things. And you know what? It's interesting. May Allah reward the brother for inspiring me. He perhaps doesn't know that he inspired me with the title of the talk, but interestingly, the whole idea of i'tikaf is really that. And that's something I addressed recently in a khutbah. The essence of what i'tikaf is, it's al-ukuf ala shay, is to fully dedicate yourself to something. And that something for us, i'tikaf, is a sense of worship and servitude and humble submission to Allah Azza wa Jal. That's what i'tikaf is. And that's why that idea, that notion of i'tikaf being a social event where I sort of like hang out with my friends and go out here or there for suhoor, isn't exactly what it's meant to be about. Even though those things aren't really bad, but there is a lot of merit to try to figure out how to incorporate the concept of temporary seclusion and healthy alone time into my schedule. Something that spawns reflection on Allah's creation and so on and so forth. So I really want it to be a discussion. That's the framing, I guess, of what inspired the talk. And I'm happy to have Ustadh Zaied here to add, and so that we can benefit from him and sort of have a discussion type of format. I don't know what you think, Maulana. If you have things to add, feel free.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Shaykh Osamah referenced the hadith just now. It's a hadith from Sayyidatna Aisha radiallahu anha, the beloved wife of our Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where she was discussing how revelation began. So she was telling the story of how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam received revelation. And she said the first thing that happened was he began to get these dreams for about 6 months. And he would have these dreams at night, and he would wake up in the day, and the dreams would happen. Whatever he saw at night in his sleep would happen. It would take place in the day. And it happened over and over and over again. And then she said, after that, Allah threw the love of seclusion in his heart. And so she defined seclusion as one of the steps that Allah built in to the Prophet ﷺ receiving wahi. And all of these things that happened to him, so seeing these dreams at night, she also mentions that he would hear the rocks and the trees saying salam to him regularly. And then he fell in love with seclusion. And she tells the story of how he would go up to Ghar Hira for long periods of time. Like he would take his food and his provisions, and he would stay in Ghar Hira for as long as possible. And then only come back when his provisions ran out. And then eventually, that very meaningful event took place with Jibreel alayhi salam that you all know of. Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. Fascinatingly enough, if you reflect on the stories of most of the prophets in the Quran and other important figures like Sayyidatna Maryam alayhi salam, you find a very similar theme from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when it comes to Musa alayhi salam, you find that in leading up to his wahi, Allah tells us that he was exiled from Egypt. He had to cut off from his language, his culture, his people, his home, his adopted home in the palace as well. And he ended up with absolutely nothing. So he's completely disconnected from everything to the point where he doesn't even know what to ask for from Allah. He says, Ya Allah, whatever good you can give me, give it to me. And then in Madian, Allah gives him a wife, He gives him a job. He stays there for a decade. And then again, right before the wahi comes to him, Musa alayhi salam is out in the desert with his family and he's lost. And then as the Quran says, the language in the Quran implies, Allah shows Musa alone. Nobody else from his family can see the fire but Musa alayhi salam. And he says, I'm going to go to seek guidance there, and that's when he's first spoken to with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The same thing with Zakaria alayhi salam, when he's given the glad tidings of a child. He says, Ya Allah, are you really going to give me a child when I'm old and my wife is barren? So give me a sign, like tell me what I should do to prepare for this and to show you thanks. And Allah says, I want you to fast for 3 days. Not the fasting that we do, but their fasting, which was don't speak to any human being for 3 full days. When Sayyidina Maryam alayhi salam is given the miraculous birth, she's told the same thing. Go to the east, stay away from people, and don't speak to anyone for 3 days. And so it seems like a part of Allah's practice for His beloved slaves is when He's preparing them for one of His miracles, and specifically when He's preparing them for wahi, for revelation, He tells them, go and sit alone. And I can think of 2 primary reasons why. One is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala genuinely loves His slaves. He really loved His prophets, and He really loves us. And there's something about distraction that can diminish love. And so you see this, for those of you in the audience who are married, especially the men in the audience who are married, you've probably heard your wife tell you multiple times, I wish when you come home you would shut off your phone and put it away. You might have parents who tell you that. When you come home, the phone's not allowed to be on. You have to put it in a box. I know several families have this habit now. There's a special box you have to put phones in when it's dinner time, because everyone's too distracted otherwise. You know, we just completed, I don't know if you guys are from Noble, but I mentioned this in Noble the other day, right? That just a lot of you guys just completed spring break, and you probably went on vacation with your families. The reason why families invest so much money in these vacations is not only because they want to have fun, but in part because they really want some unique experiences where the whole family is detached from everyone and everything else. Because when there's too much going on and the heart is soaking up too much else, it's very difficult to connect with the people that you love. And so Allah telling His Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, telling Musa alayhi salam, to seclude themselves, to pull away from the world before wahi comes, was to me, and from some of the ulama who discuss it, it's a sign of Allah's love for His ibad. You need to be, I am in love with you, and the love that you have for me needs to be at the forefront. And in order for that love to come out, you need to disconnect from everything else. The second reason is that this message, the Quran in specific, is really profound, it's really weighty, it's really heavy, and it's not something that can easily be grasped if your mind is going in a million different directions. And so I would hope the people who are in the masjid and from Ahl al-Masjid at this late in the night, you have probably experienced in your life moments where the ayat of the Quran hit you different than other moments in your life. It might have been at some time in a previous Ramadan where you're standing in Taraweeh, or you're listening to a dars, or you're reading the tafsir of an ayah, and there are just certain moments where the book of Allah hits you really hard. Most of the time, if you reflect on when those experiences happened, they tend to come after you've put in quite a bit of time trying to disconnect from other things. So maybe it doesn't come on the first night of Ramadan, it might come on night 15 or 20 or 21 or 23. Right? It rarely comes on the first night because your heart's still going through that detachment phase. And so Allah calls us to seclusion, wallahu a'lam, because He loves us. And in order for that love to be rejuvenated, you need to kind of move the distractions. And number 2, He's trying to give us a real message that you can't really grasp unless you seclude yourself. And so the importance of seclusion to the relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be overstated. And I don't know where else to go with this, but I will mention this one thing. I've always actually understood that the month of Ramadan and the fasting of the month of Ramadan is actually, in totality, it is about seclusion. So the idea of fasting is that you're going to tear away things from your life. And those parts of the dunya that are most consuming in your life. So eating, drinking, and if you have a mate, spending intimate time with them. These are the 3 things that are the most connected a human being typically is with the dunya. And by cutting them out for all of that time, it's specifically a form of seclusion. I'm going to cut off from my heart the love of this stuff. And the fascinating thing is, and I guess I'll stop here and see if anybody has any comments to the Shaykh does. When you fast, one thing that becomes very evident, around night 8 or 9 or 10, most of us, even if you're really hungry when iftar comes, you cannot eat that much. Right? So you might think, I'm going to eat a huge amount. If you're out, you might order a large amount. If you're making dinner, you might make quite a bit. And then there's always a lot of leftovers. And for families, what normally might feed you for a night starts to feed you for 2 or 3 nights because no one can eat all that much. The reason being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in us this sunnah, that your body and your heart and your soul will actually get used to what you give it. And so if you withhold things from your body, like food, it starts to actually naturally over time want less and less and less. And if you give it more, it'll want more and more and more, and it'll feel like it needs more and more. And this thing is no different. So you'll find if you are connected to your phone all the time, you become addicted to it. Because you don't even feel normal without looking at it. That 100 times a day thing that the Shaykh was talking about, most of us do it and we don't even think about it because our hearts just become so connected to it. But if you have ever taken a break, even if it's just a day-long break from it, you start to feel like, I can't believe how much better my life is without this darn thing in my face. And if you keep that up, you actually don't need it anymore. And you start to find like all this stuff that I thought was important, all these social media posts that I thought were so important, all this beef that's going back and forth, all these jokes going on that I feel the need to be a part of when I'm looking at it all the time. As soon as I stop looking at it, it means absolutely nothing to me. And it makes no impact on my life. And so seclusion has the power to give you autonomy and give you control over yourself again. And it has that power to rekindle the love that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed for Him in your heart. Wallahu a'lam.
You know, there's there's a qaida fiqhiyya. It's used in issues relating to fiqh that says al-mashghulu la yashghal. That which is already occupied by one thing can't be occupied by something else. It's just like if you think of it as a vessel, as a cup. If it's full, then of one drink or whatnot, you know, what else could you really use it for? It's already used up entirely, and you know, I guess in that sense, you know, basically, if my heart's full of something other than Allah, then how could I really connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know, beautiful connection with eating and drinking and intimacy, of how those are really the core things of what take up people's time, and how fasting really just changes the dynamic, and you know, gives us an opportunity to develop a new routine around something else. You know, one verse, Sheikh Ustadh Zaied, that really catches my attention. There's actually a verse and there's a hadith that actually emphasize what you were saying. It's the verse is من خشي الرحمن بالغيب وجاء بقلب منيب. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala singles out a person who has a special type of humble submission to Allah. And that is, it's characterized by feeling that humble submission in seclusion, when you're alone. And the hadith that also says that, it's one of the people who are in the shade of Allah on the Day of Judgment. It says, وَرَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا. A person who remembers Allah and he remembers Him alone, and then gets very emotional, begins to cry in his, I guess, spiritual connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I really think that there's a lot to think about in terms of, you know, spiritual healing and what seclusion could do for it. You know, and what I mean by spiritual healing is, you know, I see Ramadan as really just a process of spiritual healing. You know, it changes a lot of dynamics, and it, you know, basically a lot of things, you know, you could think of it like layers of impact and influence on the heart develop over the year, throughout the year. Causes a sense of like spiritual rust. Ghabash. And what Ramadan does is it, washes all that away. It helps, I guess clean a person's slate. If anyone was to ask, what's the best way to grow spiritually, I really can't think of a better way than focusing on the secret actions. And actually last night in our prayers, one of the verses came up, and the verse was, "Wallahu mukhrijun ma kuntum taktumun." Allah will bring to light what you concealed. And basically, the thought that came to my mind when I read that verse was, are we really ever alone? Are we really ever alone? From human beings, yeah. But from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no, never. We're never alone in that sense. If I really want to heal, then I need to see how I'm acting when I'm alone. That's the key to spiritual healing. That's why when they came to that tabi'in, they said, give us advice. They went to one of the tabi'in, a few young people, and they said, give us advice. So he said, as-sara'ir, alaykum bis-sara'ir. Be keen on those private things, your private time. How do you spend it? التي تخفى على الناس. Those things, they're hidden to people, but they're very, very known to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Maulana, but for basically just to sum up, it's a means to spiritual healing, and really it it gives an opportunity for spiritual clarity. ذكر الله خاليا ففاضت عيناه. والله أعلم.
Barakallah feek, Shaykhna. There's a lot of thought. I hope Allah allows me to remember everything, because there's a lot that came to my mind while you were speaking. But firstly, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. There's actually a hadith of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he says that the most, if I remember the hadith correctly, the most rewarded person on the Day of Judgment will be a man, or potentially a woman, who nobody knew when they were on earth. So they had no impact, like they weren't known for their ibadah, they weren't known as like a popular person, they weren't like some sort of great leader of men or women, but they worshipped Allah in secret with such sincerity that Allah loved them greater than anyone else. This person will be among the greatest of the believers on the Day of Judgment. They're completely unknown to people, but fully known with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there is something that all of my teachers used to tell me when I used to ask them, like, how do you grow in sincerity? Like, I want to be someone who's sincere. How do I make sure, like, I really struggle with, all of us struggle with sincerity, but I used to tell them I genuinely struggle with being sincere in my ibadat. And over again, the advice I would be given is you have to have some ibadahs that you do in complete secret. Like, you have to plan to have ibadahs that you do in complete secret, that no one will know about, no one you live with even can know about. And they would say, go out of your way. In fact, this is a dangerous thing to share in a public forum, but hopefully everyone understands what I'm trying to say here. Some of the ulama were known in the past, and they actually discussed this in some of their books, where they would lie to hide some of the good deeds that they did. And so they would lie to let people think that they spent their time differently than they really did, because they didn't want anyone to know that they would spend their time in ibadah. And so they would talk about, like, so for example, in today's world, it could be like you were spending the whole night tonight in the masjid or in ibadah in your home, and then tomorrow when you're with your friends, you talk about the Final Four. Even though you saw not 1 second of it, but you talk about it in the hopes that they think you were watching it last night. Now, I'm not asking any of you to do that, but this is how far the ulama used to go to cover their deeds, to make sure that their heart only desired Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there definitely is something, again, like it's difficult to overstate just how important seclusion is to spiritual well-being. There is also the fact, this is the second thought that came to me when you were speaking, Shaykhi. Imam Ghazali talks about, in his Ihya, he talks about 3 different levels of fasting. So he talks about the fast of Ramadan specifically, and he says, there are 3 levels here. There's the fasting of the awam, the fasting of the common Muslim. Very important. That's just the fiqhi fast. I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink, I'm not going to be intimate from Fajr until Maghrib. Beautiful, very important, enough to get you, inshallah, into Jannah and be beloved by Allah. The second level is that you fast from anything that may be displeasing to Allah during your fast, anything evil. And this goes back to the hadith of Rasul ﷺ where he says Allah is not in need of your fasting if you're going to speak ill of people or you're going to do any sort of backbiting or evil deed. Allah doesn't need you to leave your food and drink if that's the way you're going to believe, if that's the way you're going to act. Now He's not saying don't fast. He's talking about a higher level of fasting. So I'm going to fast even from the sins that I normally do that won't break my fast. So maybe you listen to something, like music is an all-encompassing thing in our lives today. Maybe you listen to some stuff you know outside of Ramadan you shouldn't listen to it, but at the very least in Ramadan I won't. I'll listen to some Maher Zain stuff instead or some Deen Squad. Still better just listen to Quran or don't listen to anything. But if I have to, I'll listen to something that at least has Allah's name in it, right? And then the third level is that you fast at a point where I want to fast so that my heart is only thinking about Allah throughout the entire month. And this is extremely, I don't know, I have never been able to achieve this. I don't think anyone I've ever known has been able to achieve this. This is a very difficult state to live in. But some of our ulama and some of the great saints of our past have reached it, where the entire Ramadan, the point of the Ramadan is nothing of this dunya will enter into my heart other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so again, the entirety of Ramadan feels to me as like an invitation to seclusion from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There was another thought, but wallahi Shaykh, I can't remember.
There's a joke about one of the points you were mentioning. In book of Tazkiyah, they wanted to highlight the difference between riya and sum'ah. Riya is basically showing off with your actions, and sum'ah is basically seeking reputation, speaking highly of yourself. And basically what the author was writing, he was like, there was a person praying, the shaitan's tricky. Sometimes it sounds funny when I'm going to say it, how on earth can someone do such a thing? But sometimes shaitan could blind us from foolish behavior sometimes. So basically what the man entered the masjid, he was praying, and he was really focused in his prayer, and it was full of khushu', and there was some people sitting nearby, and one of the people in the circle commented on the man's prayer. He said, "Wow, he has such a focused and prayer that's full of khushu', mashallah." So the brother heard him, and when he finished, he came and he said, "By the way, I'm fasting too." And you'd think, oh, what is this? But sometimes, basically it's sum'ah and riya. Sometimes the shaitan makes the person do foolish things. What am I really intending by my actions? What am I trying to get out of them? Who am I as a person? How do I handle myself publicly and privately? That's something to really think about. Because there's two hadiths, Mawlana, they really scare me. One hadith is the Prophet ﷺ said to the companions, there is going to be groups of people that come on the Day of Judgment with good deeds the size of the mountains of Tihama, and it's all going to become dispersed dust. It's going to turn to nothing. Absolutely no value. So then the companions got scared. Who are these people? Tell us about them. We don't want to be from them. So then the Prophet ﷺ explained who they were by how they handled their private time. He said, they're people that are just like you. They pray too. They're from the same backgrounds, but they're people that when they're alone with the boundaries of Allah, they breach them. Who am I as a person? How do I handle the public and the private? The other hadith is a man that's going to be in hellfire, and he's going to be walking about hellfire screaming in pain, and it's going to be so obvious that the people of hellfire are going to gather around him, and they're going to be surprised. First off, what are you doing here? Second, Why are you in so much pain? You know, so they ask him this question. You used to be a person who told us to do good things in life. Well, you know, what are you doing in hellfire? So then he'll say, I would tell people to do goodness. I wouldn't do it myself. And then I would tell people to avoid bad things. I'd end up doing them myself. That's a scary thing. It's all going back to this same subject. How am I handling my time and my time allotment? There's a lot of different talking points, but this is just another one of them. If I want to grow spiritually, I really need to see how I'm handling myself in my private time.
Yeah, I would also, like that link between private and public, it sparked a thought in my mind. We're living in a day and age where most people don't know how to be with other people because they don't know how to be alone. So most people struggle, at my work, when we hire, the newest generation of workers coming into the labor force. One thing, there are many things very evident about them, but the one I'll talk about today is that they genuinely don't know how to be social, face to face, even over video. Like they're so awkward, face to face or over. They just don't know how to smile. They don't know when to joke. They don't know how to react to a joke. But over text, amazing. Like they know when to say what, how to say it, what certain emojis should be used and why this emoji is a little bit better than this emoji, but they cannot do it if they're in person or over video. Right? And the thing is that most of these people also complain so often about anxiety. So when they're talking to me like, hey, we're going to have like an all hands meeting, either over video or in person. And I'll get these like emails and texts and phone calls from employees who tell me like I'm really nervous, I get socially anxious and can I skip it? Can I like be excused early because I can't handle it? And unfortunately, you have to baby them a little bit. But the reality is I want to tell them the reason why you're like this is because you have never actually built up an identity that is confident and comfortable, that is built completely on you. Right? So much of our lives today, when you engage in that social media world so much of who you are is completely dependent on what everyone else is saying around you. And it's so fluid and so ooey gooey, like there's no limits, there's no real definition of what you stand for and who you are and what brings you value and what makes you who you are, what anchors you, because you've never actually taken that time. And that actually requires a lot of deep, like social, private reflection. I won't mention his name because his name doesn't deserve to be said in the masjid, but there's a very famous comedian who a few years ago was talking on a late night talk show, and he said something that, sometimes may Allah guide these people to Islam, sometimes they say some fascinating stuff and I don't think they realize how profound it is. So he was joking about the phone, this comedian. And he was like, I went to pick up my phone. He's like, I was driving down the road and I started to think about like the existential dread that I face. He's an atheist, right? So like life doesn't mean anything. It's worthless. It has no point. Why am I even alive? Those thoughts were creeping into my mind and my heart. And I started to get so like nervous and shaky. So I picked up my phone and I just started to text everybody I can text and DM everyone I knew, just so that I don't have to face that ugly dread in my heart. And he thought he was being funny. And everyone in the audience got quiet. Because it wasn't that funny. It's so true for most people. They don't know how to live with themselves. One of my teachers, may Allah reward him, he passed away many years ago. His name is Tariq Dahmis. He was a mentor of mine, and Sheikh Yasser for that matter. He was the first person ever who insisted on us that we cannot, this is going to sound funny, we're not allowed to listen to anything when we drove. And he was one of my teachers when I was in college. So I'd commute back and forth between classes, not allowed to listen, not just to no music. You can't listen to any Quran, don't listen to any talks, don't listen to any durus, don't listen to the news. And when we asked him why, he was like, people today, this was way before phones became popular. He was like, people today get in the car, they put this stuff on because they don't want to deal with themselves. You guys have to learn how to deal with your inner thoughts. You have to learn how to deal with your feelings. You have to learn how to articulate them for yourselves. And if you're constantly pumping nonsense into your ears and into your heart, you're not going to be able to do it. On that point, this is the last thing I'll mention. Tariq Tahmis rahmatullah alayh was the reason why I didn't give khutbas for a very long time. When I was first invited to give khutbas, again, he was my mentor back then, and he looked at me and said, absolutely not. Right? In fact, I was elected, I think, to some seat in the MSA, and he's like, absolutely not. And when I asked him why, he's like, you're not a khatib, you don't live the life of a khatib, you don't live the life of someone who should be like in any position of responsibility. You're a joke. This is his exact words to me. You're a joke, and you need to deal with yourself as if you're a joke. Right? If you're serious enough, and you really are like meant for, Allah will bring it back to you. But you are not fit for this stuff, so don't put yourself in that position. It's just going to become a fitna for you. And I thank Allah every day that He like beat that into me for years when He was alive. He would not let us. Maybe Shaykh Yasser was different. Shaykh Yasser was always ahead of me in everything, mashallah. So maybe he was different. But for me, he was like, absolutely not. You're not allowed to do any of this stuff while I'm around, because you just don't live that lifestyle. For that exact reason. He's like, you get on the minbar, and you start to talk this nonsense, like you start to talk this beautiful stuff, but you're living nonsense, you're going to doom yourself. Better for you, just be a joke, but be out of the limelight. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah for good teachers.
SubhanAllah. Jazakallah khair for that, Maulana. SubhanAllah. That's very interesting, though, not being able to function without something playing in the background. I think that's very, very common. I think people actually... a lot of people end up sleeping like that too. They can't sleep when things are quiet. They just need to put something on. Some noise needs to be there always. And I guess if you think about that, I remember, I guess this takes me back to high school, but I remember that there was, in one of my classes in high school, teacher wanted there to be absolute silence for a class, and the students were having so much difficulty with that. And one of them, I joked about it, but I think it was actually kind of serious. A lot of people feel this way. She said, I don't like the silence. It scares me. It reminds me of death. I think, for us, that's actually one of the ways to efficiently worship, to be in a state of stillness, inward focus. People are just so used to being busy and active, and not having a chance to just step back and look at things from a fresh perspective. Sheikh Ustadh Zaied, there's actually in the books of Tazkiyah they mention مراقبة الخواطر قبل مراقبة الأفعال. Okay, so it's one thing to observe your actions and watch your thoughts. That's one thing. We all could appreciate that. What am I doing? Why am I doing it? Why am I doing this instead of that? Observing your actions, that's something that we could appreciate. Holding yourself accountable is something that's very familiar to our understandings. But, what this Sheikh was saying in this book was actually where it starts off is by observing your thoughts. Because your thoughts are what end up leading to your actions. So if you're able to get it at the point where it's still just a thought, then you're actually going to be able to build a greater, healthier spiritual environment within. Basically, in other words, if I allow these toxic thoughts to consume me, how on earth am I ever going to gain a sense of spirituality? If I'm thinking, oh, he's doing this because of that, and she thinks this of me because she looked like that, and this person's always acting like that, and having rage and anger and assumptions and dhunoon, there's no way that heart's ever going to experience sakina. That heart is in a state of turmoil. And that's, I guess, what, that whole idea of stillness and dealing with yourself, brings to my mind, Maulana.
Yeah, this also goes back, like I know a lot of times we get this question, like, am I going to be judged by like my thoughts or my desires? And normally the answer people are looking for is like, no, as long as you don't do the action, you won't be judged. And that's true. From a like halal haram perspective, it's true. But what the Shaykh said is talked about in any book, every single book that talks about like spiritually purifying yourself and increasing your awareness in your ibadah. Every single one talks about like you need to be able to deal with your thoughts. And here's the tricky thing about it. If you don't spend time trying to teach yourself like how to like actually picking up on your thoughts, you'll never actually do it. Most people go through life. This is the state of ghafla. When the Quran talks about ghafla, about being heedless, this is what it's talking about. That all this stuff is going on inside of you and you have no actual awareness that it's happening inside of you. And so a couple of, I don't remember what Friday it was, the last time I was here giving the khutbah, I spoke about this quite a bit, that what happens for so many of us is we have these questions that we ask. And we never stop to reflect on where did the question even come from. So I mentioned that question in the khutbah of, what is the question that we get all the time? Oh, why would Allah create someone with a desire and then hate them, right? Or make them haram, right? Why would Allah give someone a desire and make them haram? And nobody ever stops to wonder, why is that question even popping up in my head? This wasn't a common question for most of human history. People didn't ask this question, right? But now it's the question on everybody's mind. Or everybody now has questions about gender. And does the Quran really have to have a gender? And how does this Quran deal? Do you really think this thought came out of nowhere? This is just the normal human thought that happens all the time? No, most of humanity never asks these questions. But they're coming up now because you're consuming all this nonsense all the time. And so it's impossible not to ask yourself. But most people never stop, they never learn to even hear their own thoughts, because it can be quite terrifying. When you go through this, there are some young brothers in the masjid who I remember over the last few years who were starting to do this, and the amount of questions, you might know who I'm talking about as soon as I bring up some of the questions. We'll start to get questions in the text of I thought about a bad thing. I can't believe I thought about it. I thought about doing something haram with this person that I never thought about in the past, and I don't know how to stop it. And then you give them, it's okay, just try to kill it. And then a few hours later, oh, I had this other thought that I can't stop. Because they're starting to finally get used to the fact of listening to what's going on inside. And all of a sudden it's what in the world is happening to me? And you start to notice the ulama go into great detail about knowing the difference between your nafs and the shaitan. What is coming from the nafs, what is coming from the shaitan. What is the difference between something just being a thought and then becoming a niyyah, and then between a niyyah and an action. And as soon as you start going down this pathway, and it becomes a little bit overwhelming and scary, but then it becomes an extremely powerful tool, because you start to be able to catch yourself long before you let anything become a reality in your heart and in your mind.
And I don't know if you have thoughts on this, Ustadh Zaied, but usually, I guess what you may be hearing in classes and khutab and everything is beware of alone time, right? That's why in the beginning we were talking about healthy alone time. Beware of alone time in the sense that if you don't consume yourself with good things, your nafs will consume you with falsehood. إِن لَمْ تُشْغِلْ نَفْسَكَ بِالْحَقِّ شَغَلَتْكَ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Now, of course, I think there's something to be said about how to really go about having productive alone time, because I think it could actually be very destructive if you have a block in your day that there's nothing really happening in it, and you have just time all by yourself. Actually it's actually a catalyst for a lot of addictions, actually kaba'ir, major sins that people end up doing. So I think the scholars, they say certain things about this. How should I do it? When should I do it? Will it have a good end for me? I think these are all things to think about and consider. When I enter into, I guess, what they call this time of temporary seclusion, it needs to be for a really particular goal. And I really need to know about how to efficiently do it. If I want to make the most of it, how should I reflect? What's the best way to, develop this ability to, I guess you could say, connect with things spiritually. When you hear about people of the past, and one of them saying, whenever I see something, I see one of two things in it: a sign from Allah in it, or a blessing from Allah for me in that thing. It's either a blessing or it's a reminder. How can I really have that spiritual lens? I think a lot of questions, in that. I don't know if you have something to comment on that, Maulana.
You should be the one commenting.
Conversation.
So there are two things that came to mind when you asked that question. I think number one, it's important. It's a very good point, Sheikh. Yes, we're talking about being alone. We're not talking about being useless and lazy. We're talking about being alone, right? So, and one thing that people don't like to admit or realize is that spirituality, despite the New Age definition of it, is much like physical training. So if you want to develop a healthy spirituality, you have to actually approach it like an exercise. Meaning, okay, I'm going to be alone, but my time alone is not just sitting blankly staring at the wall. It's, I'm going to have a wird. So I want to finish this much Quran. Even if it's like I'm going to just read 2 ayat with the tafsir every day. But I'm going to do it completely alone in silence. My phone is away from me, it's off. I'm alone completely, and that's what I'm doing every single day. And then you have some adhkar. I'm going to say adhkar al-sabah or adhkar al-masa, or I'm going to say astaghfirullah al-azim wa atubu ilayh 50 times or 100 times. You have an actual litany, like this is my exercise. Just like I might be doing 100 push-ups and 100 squats or whatever, I'm going to run a mile or 2 or 10, whatever it is. I'm going to do this much dhikr by myself in private. And the next question that's going to come as soon as you start doing that is, I start doing the dhikr and then my mind wanders. That's perfectly fine. You just come right back. I did the first 20 and my mind was gone. Okay, the next 20, try your best to be focused. And what happens is over time, your heart gets more and more used to focusing on the dhikr. And I begin with the dhikr because Allah is needed. If you want to overcome your nafs, Allah is needed to support you. You cannot overcome it on your own. And this is one of the biggest falsehoods that the shaitan sells you. Is that like this is all about you and how strong you can be, and then you're going to fail over and over again. Even in that moment in the cave, when Jibreel comes and says, Ya Muhammad, iqra, what is the Prophet's response? I don't know how to read or I don't know what to read. 3 times. And then how does Allah respond? Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq. It's not through your own power and your own ability that you're going to read. I will give you the words and I will give you the strength to read. It's not through you. And so you want to get control over yourself, it begins with you connecting with Allah. So number one, yes, you're going to have alone time, but you're going to have it with an exercise of dhikr. No matter how small it is, I'm going to do it every single day. And number two, you really just have to get used to asking yourself simple but difficult questions, and you cannot lie to yourself. That means, for example, you know what? Today I got into a fight with my mom. I got frustrated. Why did I get frustrated? And then you might tell yourself, well, my mother said A, B, C, D. And that's a 100% complete lie. It's almost never your mother's fault. Very rarely is it going to be your mother's fault if you did something to her. It's always going to be your fault. And so you're going to have to stop and say, no. Why did I really get frustrated? Well, I got frustrated because I really wanted to stay sleeping, but she didn't let me get up. Whatever it is, right? And you have to actually be genuinely honest about yourself. How did my frustration build? Why did I say what I said to her? How was I wrong? And then you got to go back and correct it. And you have to do this every single day. This is why there's that advice from the ulama of muraqabah, that every night before you go to sleep, you should spend some time asking yourself these questions. What did I do? Why did I do that? And you cannot lie to yourself. Like you have to, there's no other way for me to put it. You're going to say, how do I know not to lie to myself? You know. Like there's no good way for me to say it. The only possible other advice is have a really close friend who's going to tell you that you're lying to yourself. You go to that friend and be like, hey, I was thinking ABC, and that friend, if they're a good friend, would be like, nah, you're just, like the truth is you just, you messed up. You just don't want to admit it. But you have to do these 2 things. You have to have an exercise of dhikr, and you have to get in the habit of asking yourself simple but uncomfortable questions and knowing how to be honest with yourself. This was actually my shortcoming here and not somebody else's. Wallahu a'lam, Shaykh. I don't know what you're going to say to that.
Jazakallah khair, Maulana. Allah yabarak feek. I would actually add, I think we're all really connected with the phones, the gadgets, the social media, for the most part, and I think that it's really worth trying to make a sacrifice. Take a week and give it a try. I know that people often think, well, you know what, it's not all bad. I connect with friends, I see articles that people post, I read good things, I listen to lectures and all the rest. It's, why do I have to see it as a bad thing? I guess it's not about seeing it as a good or bad thing. It's actually just having something that sort of disrupts routine, changes my schedule, gets me out of, I guess, certain, modes of behavior. If I'm always doing this, well, why don't I just try doing something else for a little bit and just putting this thing away, turning off, access to, whatever it is, shows, TVs, movies, and all the rest, and just trying to focus on something else, focus inward. That's what Ramadan is really calling us to do. And I think if you try the exercise, you'll find some great results. We got some question here. If you guys have any other questions, you guys could post it you could send it to the Google Voice number, and perhaps in the last few minutes of this talk we could address it. But I don't know if you want to read this one, Maulana, or if there's any other question that you got your way.
I think it's the same one, yeah. There's the two questions.
It's the same one?
Yeah, I'll read it to you. I had two questions. How to decrease yourself in arrogance when your job also requires you to have a lot of self-confidence and has a strict structure. Example, doctor or nurse. Essentially maintain self-worth and confidence but not becoming arrogant. No, I'll leave that one to you.
I guess the first one, it says how to decrease yourself in arrogance. It's a good question, to be introspective like that. I think, one of the things that, I guess it relates to the topic, really affects the way we operate is, everything around us is like, pushing us to put ourselves out there. I need to put myself out there. I need to make my credentials known to everyone. I need to, be confident and outspoken in my views and in my beliefs. And a lot of the times this could lead to a lot of corrosive spiritual things to develop in the heart, like the person is asking about, like arrogance. Really this idea of, retreating away from the limelight is not something that people really favor. Actually, it's all about going towards the limelight, trying to gain that attention. That's what really social media is pushing us towards a lot of the time. And whereas you find some of the spiritual things that are highlighted in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْعَبْدِ التَّقِي النَّقِي الْخَفِي. Allah loves that servant who is pious, is pure, and does so with a sense of privacy, and secrecy. So I guess you could say, if you really want to remedy some of the things that come about by that culture that teaches us that we always got to pursue the limelight, like arrogance, is doing its opposite. Doing its opposite. I remember hearing a story, about one of the scholars who was called to a debate, and he's a very well-known scholar, and he was able to, basically demolish the other side. The other side was someone who was speaking out against religion, had all kinds of misconceptions in his mind, and he was able to destroy him in the debate and prove the falsehood of his claims. And people were cheering him on and celebrating him and patting him on the back and singing his praises. And he felt that it affected his heart. So he asked the driver to stop by a nearby masjid. And he went down and he took some time. So the driver was worried. Where'd he go? So he went inside the masjid. He found the sheikh cleaning the bathroom stalls, organizing the bathroom to sort of humble his nafs. Sometimes you need to tame the beast. What's the beast? It's the nafs. If I allow myself to ingratiate myself in my ego, it could be very, very dangerous. So how do I really temper this? I need to do the opposite. If I feel arrogance creeping in, I need to do something that's going to humble me. I'm going to do an act of service. This sheikh was cleaning the bathrooms, He went from, being in the limelight to actually say, I need to control my nafs. So that's one thing I would say. Do a lot of service. If you want to cure arrogance, do a lot of service. If you want to cure riya and showing off, do a lot of secret actions. Always do the opposite of what the disease is, and you'll find that it'll start remedying it. Wallahu alam.
The only thing else, that was a wonderful summation, Shaykhi. I'll say one thing though, because this question comes up from time to time. There's a big difference between being confident and being arrogant. The two things are not really the same at all. Confidence tends to come from preparation, practice, and experience. Right? So I've done this a lot, I've studied it, I've done it oftentimes, and I've gotten the desired result. So I can be confident that I know what I'm doing, and if I do it again, I'll be successful. So if you're a doctor or a nurse, which is what the question's asking, and you studied and you've been practicing for a while, you've probably, if you're still practicing, you still have your license and patients coming to you, most likely you've done the same thing over and over and over again, and you've had good results with people. That's confidence. Like, I can trust the fact that I've gone through this, I know what to do. Arrogance is when you begin to feel yourself as something special, especially when compared to other people. Like, I am something great and special. I need to be noticed by people. Those two things are not really the same. And oftentimes we conflate them to be the same, but they come from completely different places. Arrogance is from a state of you feeling like you're somehow more special than the people around you, or more worth it than the people around you. Confidence is about, I've done this, I've had success, I know what I'm doing. And Allah loves for you to be confident and competent, right? Confidence comes from competence. And Allah loves the abd that is strong. No abd is strong except that they're confident. So the two things are completely different, and they come from different places, wallahu alam. In that same thing, yeah. Tips on increasing, do you want to do the next one?
That's up to you.
It's up to you, Shaykh. It's your,
Do you have a comment on that second question?
I think we already addressed it. Tips on increasing mindfulness in day-to-day activities, especially or as well as spiritual ones. Mindfulness is really just a struggle. You're going to keep losing your focus, you just got to bring it back. There's really no other way. There's no other, some of the tips are the more you do it, the easier it becomes, but you really just have to do it. And you're going to keep failing, and you're going to keep going back and failing and going back and failing and going back. And over time it just gets a little easier, and then you'll get distracted again in life by something new, and you'll have to try it all over again. Wallahu a'lam.
Another thing for that is maybe perhaps if you're talking about mindfulness and performance of acts of worship, I guess using your imagination could be helpful too. There's so many stories of the Salaf where they would, incorporate some symbolism and reflection in the different motions of worship, like saying Allahu Akbar. Like there's one story of the Salaf that he would every time before prayer would start, his face would get a little pale. He'd look a little nervous. So they asked him, "Why are you like that?" And he said, "I'm afraid that I'm going to say Allahu Akbar with my tongue, but I'm actually going to have something bigger in my heart than Allah Azza wa Jal." So that's the type of reflection, I guess, that would be helpful with mindfulness. Or that person who, when they would be in prayers, they would imagine that they could see the people of Jannah on their right enjoying the bliss of Jannah, and the people of hellfire on their left, and the Sirat in front of them. That type of space of reflection. Or there's one of the scholars, his name is Imam Ibn al-Qayyim. He instructed he referred to it as Bayda' al-Tajarrud, the barren land of tajarrud, freeing yourself of everything other than Allah, sort of imagining a space of, I guess, nothingness, but your connection to Allah. If you use your mind in that type of sense, there's so much to say about that in terms of dhikr that our scholars or that our righteous salaf used, and I guess their spiritual development. The mind is a magnificent thing. Imagination is a very vast ocean, and it could be very helpful in actually experiencing some of those things. Wallahu alam. This is the other question.
How do you deal with guilt when you're doing something that is displeasing to Allah, but you want to be better? May Allah Ta'ala reward you for wanting to be better and for your guilt. Guilt is actually a very positive sign. And guilt and regret, specifically, that's tawbah. So for you to feel a guilty feeling about a sin and then feel regretful over it, like I wish I didn't do it, that is the essence of repentance. There's no repentance without feeling regret. And so that's really the answer. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God in His infinite mercy, created this concept of tawbah that is always open. And no matter what you do, you can always, as long as you turn back to Him and you genuinely, sincerely regret doing the sin and you want to stop it, that's beautiful. That's all you need to do. Then just actually try to stop it. And if you happen to fall into it again, just do it again and again and again. The real problem comes when you don't feel guilty. And I don't mean this like, I have to say this these days. There's a war on shame these days. And I don't think Muslims should buy into that. We're not shameful in the sense of like, we don't believe in being ashamed of ourselves. Like if I believe in something, I should be proud of it, right? If Allah made me look a certain way, yeah, be proud of the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you look. He gave you curly hair or straight hair or no hair, like some of us. Don't be ashamed. Alhamdulillah, Allah gave me what He gave me. But shame in the sense of like, I make mistakes and I should feel ashamed in front of Allah. No, that's a beautiful thing, and we don't reject that, we embrace it. When you should be worried about yourself is when you stop feeling shame and guilt. Then you're in trouble, because then Allah has let you go completely. So if you feel guilty over something you're doing that's displeasing to Allah, that's good. Couple that with regret and with a niyyah to not go back, that's tawbah. And then inshaAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can turn your sin into a good deed.
There's another question here, Ustadh Zaied. It says, so we can say that doing dhikr during commute, for example, can be considered as alone time, seclusion, or should it be more like meditation? I don't know exactly what you mean, should it be more like meditation, but one thought I do have is, yeah, it would be great and wonderful to take advantage of something that's already in your routine, like commuting to work, to capitalize on it, to do dhikr and adhkar. I also think it's useful to have some dedicated alone time, where it's not that just because it happens to fit into a certain routine act that I'm doing, but I'm actually intentionally dedicating a time in my day where I am going to disconnect from everything and focus on a particular wird or a particular act of worship. I think that's really important to have in mind. But I don't know if you have any other comment on that, or what do you think they mean by short, or should it be like meditation?
No, I think you got it exactly.
That's exactly what they meant. Okay, there's this other question here.
Well, this is
a long question.
This is a long question, and it goes a little bit off topic. My partner got into a porn addiction at a young age and has been working on it. I have seen great improvement, but every once in a while they get back into that addiction. As a spouse, I'm in constant fear that their alone time, they might be doing something like watching porn, and sometimes I overthink it and doubt them even when they may not be doing it. What should I do as a spouse to continue to help them to overcome this addiction, and how to put my mind at peace and not let my mind go to thinking that they might be doing that? How to get rid of this fear and anxiety and feeling of hurt? You want to take that one, Shaykhi?
No, منكم نستفيد. I have some thoughts, but I'd like to.
Oh, go for it,
please. So this is definitely, very tragic. I'm sorry you have to deal with this, whoever's asking the question. And it's very unfortunate, very common. I guess this is it somehow has to do with the topic, in the sense that this is basically an example of what toxic alone time could actually do to a person. It could be very destructive, especially when it manifests in a sexual addiction. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. And I guess this is a really important thing to consider for every person, especially if you're at that point in your life where you're not married, and you're still growing, and to consider that these are the type of thing that needs to be absolutely overcome, because it could have devastating consequences on your future marriage. One of the worst things to creep into a marriage is mistrust. And when it does, it's very difficult to remedy it and resolve it. It needs perhaps counseling, and it very well may need time. And sometimes, it could actually, poke a hole into the health of a relationship that might not be reconcilable. So this is, and of course, you could see the hurt in the person's words. It's very difficult to consider a type of, but that's how the fitrah could be distorted by something, as damaging as this type of sexual addiction. وَالْعِيَاذُ بِاللَّهِ. For some, perhaps they cannot experience intimacy without resorting to such type of things, and that's actually something that people have struggled with. So I guess some thoughts on how to really deal with this. You very well may need some counseling, and perhaps perspectives and priorities need to be highlighted and magnified in such counseling sessions that maybe perhaps might help you look past this. And perhaps the spouse who's still struggling with this type of thing needs that type of counseling that'll help them, I guess, see the destructive element of this in their life. Wallahu alam. So that's really the only thing I can think of to highlight is, hey, this is the type of thing that you need a third party perhaps to help you overcome. To look past the details and, perhaps find a way to gain trust again. Wallahu alam.
I'll add a few things that are specific to the question. Firstly, alhamdulillah that there's been improvement, and alhamdulillah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed enough tranquility in both of your hearts that you've been able to stay together through this. There's a lot that's left unsaid, meaning I don't know how this addiction came to be known. Did the person who was addicted just come to the spouse and tell them, I'm going through this and I need help? Did they get caught and that's the only reason why the conversation never came up? A lot of these details would say quite a bit about where the relationship stands, right? If someone comes to you as a spouse and tells you, I'm struggling with this problem, all on their own volition, there's much more trust that should be given to that person because they never needed to come tell you. But if it just happened to come out because you caught them in a lie, or you caught them doing it and they couldn't get out of it, that's a very different scenario. The part of the question about like how do I handle that person being alone and trusting them, that's a very fair question. There's nothing I can say other than, just if they're going to be alone, they shouldn't have any technology with them. Most of the time, porn these days is consumed through technology, not through magazines like it used to be. And so if they want to be alone for ibadah, great. No phones, no computer, no TV. You're in a space in the house that has absolutely no technology in it. And then you can feel confident that, or at least a little bit more confident that they're not doing something wrong in their time. And if the person is genuinely sincere about getting over this problem, they would probably agree to those stipulations. So if they tell you that they're worshiping Allah, great. Why do you need technology while you're worshiping Allah? And I do have to double down and echo on what Shaykh Osamah said. To regain trust in a marriage after something like this happens requires quite a bit of effort and work. and having someone who's trained and has experience in this and is competent in helping people deal with this, I think will be a huge plus for you. That might be difficult because oftentimes one of the spouses does not want to do that. We'll leave out which gender that is. I'm sure everyone knows there's at least one gender in every relationship that does not want to get counseling. But this is the type of scenario where it probably helps more than it hurts, because there's a lot of, it's not easy, it's very easy to destroy trust, and it's very, very, very difficult to rebuild trust. So if this person got caught doing it, I would imagine they would have to be free of it for years and years before trust is completely restored. And that process in between is going to have a lot of pain and grief. And you need constant, I think, support to help you through it. So I do think finding someone that both spouses can feel comfortable with, that'll counsel, will be helpful, inshallah. I hope that was helpful.
Jazakallah khair, Maulana. Allah yabarik feekum, ya Rabb. I guess if no one else has anything to say directly, I think we've been at it for a little over an hour. We can close here, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khair. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. So we're going to take a pause now. We got a 15-minute break perhaps, and we're going to continue until 4:15. We'll pray some rak'at. We have Amu Fikri with us. We'll hopefully benefit from him, and some khawatir as well. So you could take a break right now and socialize for a bit and have some refreshments, and then we'll start in a bit, inshallah. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.